Okay, let's take a closer look at Clyde and Claire. We'll work through it together here on paper, and that way you got a better idea of what it is you need to do. Or if you've done it already, you can kind of check to make sure that things went well. So the first thing we need to know about this is that we're going to have a Clyde, who's the father. We're going to have Claire, who is the mother, and eventually produce an offspring. And what we're going to track for each of these individuals is down the left side we have 9 traits, and that includes gender, that we're going to track for all 3. Now, one thing you also need to know is that there's a spinner that goes with this, so we're going to take a look at the spinner so you can understand what it is I'm doing on the video. Okay, so here's the spinner that goes with the lesson. The thing to point out is that there's 2 circles. There's an outside circle and an inside circle. And of the concentric circles, we're going to look at the outside first. This area is going to help us determine Clyde and Claire. We're going to spin the spinner, and wherever it lands, we're going to give the genotype of the indicated term. Here we've got homozygous dominant, which is double capital letters. Opposite that, homozygous recessive, which is double lowercase letters. And then we have 2 heterozygous, or 1 dominant, 1 recessive. So we're going to use this again on every trait back on the main screen. So now that we're back at our chart, we're going to assume that I'm spinning the spinner. And let's say for Clyde, we end up with homozygous dominant, and which means that Clyde is going to have a round head for a phenotype. And again, we get that from right over here. He has at least 1 uppercase R, which means he has at least 1 dominant trait, so he's going to be round. We spin for widow's peak, and in this case, Clyde ends up heterozygous, which means he will have widow's hairline. And we would continue all the way down for Clyde, and then we would next go over and start to do Claire. So let's spin 1 or 2 for Claire, and let's say Claire ends up homozygous recessive, which would make her block. And we spin for widow's peak, and let's say she also ends up heterozygous, and that would make her have widow's peak as well. And I would continue that again until I get all of the traits. Then it's time to move on to the offspring, but we're not going to spin the spinner for the offspring until we do the Punnett squares. So now that we're at the page with the Punnett squares, they give us an example, right, already completed, and then they give us place to work for our actual first trait, which is head shape. So I'm going to bring over the genotypes from the first page, and Clyde was the male, and he had homozygous dominant, and Claire was the female, homozygous recessive. And then I'm going to sort the sperm and sort the eggs through meiosis. And when I do, then I'm going to fill in the Punnett square by bringing the big R's across and little r's down. And it turns out that all 4 of the squares end up heterozygous. Now over here on the right, they ask us what's the chance or probability that an offspring over here would end up recessive. And the only way to get recessive is be like mom, which is heterozygous recessive, and there's none of those, which means a 0% chance. The genotype, now I go back to the spinner, and I spin, and I look at the numbers on the inside. And let's say I spun that spinner, and I got a 2, or a 3, or a 4. In this case, I'm going to go with a 3. And the third square says that it would be heterozygous, and that would make it round. So my first trait of my offspring is a heterozygous round offspring. Now I'm going to jump down. I've jumped down here to the gender because some kids are confused because of the fact that the letters don't work the same way. We don't have uppercase and lowercase. With a male is indicated XY, and a female is XX. So she's homozygous and he's heterozygous, but there is no dominant and recessive So when we sort out the genes through meiosis, and we fill in our Punnett squares, we get the top row is where the X's meet, the bottom row is where the X's meet the Y's, and filling in, that's a 50% probability. Now they do use the word recessive here. I'm going to cross it out. It's not a good place to use that word because gender isn't dominant or recessive. It's just, homozygous or heterozygous. I'm going to spin the spinner. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say in this case I end up with a 2. That would mean that I have a female offspring. And I'm ready to go back to the main chart. So here I am back on my main chart, and we want to go over and look at the offspring. What I'm going to do is pull from the Punnett squares that I just created, and we had a heterozygous round from the first Punnett square. And I'm going to assume that I work through this same thing all the way down until I get to the bottom here, and it turns out that we had a female offspring. Okay, so we're going to have a daughter for Clyde and Claire. And now that that's all filled out, you are ready to move on and take a look at the characteristics and draw a family portrait. So here are the phenotypes. The first one up is head shape and round versus a blockhead or square shape. So in this case, the offspring is a round head, so she would look like that. And then from there, you would go through and widow's peak and nose and ears and continue through the other 5 traits until you had all 9 of them. And once you've got them drawn, you're just going to take photos of the family portraits, PDF your spreadsheet and your Punnett squares, and post them all to your digital portfolio in Seesaw. And that's it.